The Persian Gulf War. So, the Persian Gulf War basically occurred in August of 1990 when President Saddam Hussein of Iraq seized the small neighboring oil-rich country of Kuwait. And you can see this on the map where Iraq is, and if you look south and east to it, you can see Kuwait and how much smaller it is. From there, President Bush of the United States is going to demand the unconditional withdrawal of Iraqi troops and then go on to enlist like European and Arab allies in this entire anti-Iraq coalition. But we have to kind of rewind a second and set the stage. What actually happened to cause this? So Iraq and Iran actually had just finished up an 8-year war, which was really costly. Now, most of the Western world, and actually even the Soviet Union, had helped Iraq in this war. But Iraq was economically exhausted, and they specifically owed money to like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Well, the United States State Department basically signaled a little bit to Iraq that they might support some sort of concession by Kuwait in this dispute with Iraq. And basically Hussein took this as like this signal, as like an open invitation to do what he wanted to Kuwait. So this is one part of the reason why he invades Kuwait specifically. The thing is, Saddam Hussein probably expected the United States to denounce his actions, but he probably didn't expect them to get involved militarily at this point. But what this really does is, you have to keep in mind, the Cold War is over really by the time we're getting to this point. But despite it being over, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait really gave President Bush this opportunity to assert that America had worldly influence, basically. He's going to go on to offer justification for the United States action, saying that on one hand, it's desiring to, punish armed aggression, and he points out the presumed need to protect like other neighbors from Iraq. Although actually there was very little evidence to show that Iraq would have attacked anyone else. Really, probably a buildup of like United States air power and some sort of effective economic sanction might have been enough protection and punishment. But the thing is, there's an element of wanting to assert influence, but also another objective the United States had was they wanted to destroy Iraq's capacity to create nuclear weapons. They also wanted to topple Saddam Hussein's regime. And these kinds of desires needed military action much more direct. When we get into the war itself, the terrain is really open. It's nearly uninhabited in many places, so we see a lot of traditional battles in open land outside of cities. The president is actually going to convince Congress to agree to military action specifically under the umbrella of the UN. We see the United States ignoring like compromise plans made by France and last-minute concessions made by Iraq. And this war begins the day after the UN's January 15th deadline for an Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait. So we get Operation Desert Storm opening in 1991 with massive air attacks on command centers and transportation facilities and Iraqi forward positions. In fact, these first attacks destroyed about 40 to 50% of Iraqi tanks and artillery by late February, so like about a month. The other thing is, though, these attacks seriously did hurt Iraqi civilians, basically by like disrupting utilities and food supplies. These attacks were the Persian Gulf War. The land war is also going to be relatively easy for the United States forces and everything. A lot of Hussein's forces were actually concentrated near the Persian Gulf that you can see on this map over by like Kuwait and everything, because basically Hussein expected some sort of amphibious landing near Kuwait City, and then a direct strike north along the coast. But instead, what we see is the United States, French, and British soldiers would all move far into the interior of Iraq, specifically through Saudi Arabia from the south and everything, but also through Iran a little bit too. They are going to advance then directly to liberate Kuwait. You get a ceasefire pretty quickly. The Iraqis in this way were driven out of Kuwait, but the United States, for instance, was unable to prevent many of the Iraqi troops from escaping. So we're seeing on the Allied sides, the UN, the French, the British, and the United States all together suffer only about 240 deaths in action, compared to about 100,000 deaths on Iraq's side. So the thing is, technically the United States wins the war and everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's peace in Iraq. In fact, following this war, we're going to see uprisings in Iraq, specifically within Shiites, within the Muslim religion. So there's Shiites and Sunni, and there's a very, very long history between the two sides on this, but we see it specifically a Shiite group within the Muslim religion, as well as Kurds within the north, basically trying to rise up in Iraq. But when this happens, that's basically a civil war, and the United States was unwilling to get involved in such a war. And so they would watch basically from the sidelines as Saddam Hussein would put down these uprisings and actually became kind of a hero, really, to a lot of the Islamic world in the Middle East, simply by managing to remain in power despite like all the disruptions from the Western world and from like the United States itself.